Hey, Reboot family, some of us grew up in homes surrounded by traumatic events. We were around people who abused their authority and crushed our confidence. In today's show, we're going to dissect kind of why that happens, but also how you can start rebuilding or building self-confidence right away. Let's get into it.
The REBOOT Recovery Show helps listeners overcome trauma and mental health challenges. Thousands have already experienced healing by applying what they learned on the show. And now, it's your turn.
Welcome to the REBOOT Recovery Show. I'm Evan Owens, your host. I'm here with Lori as well in our beautiful REBOOT Recovery studios. We're excited about today's topic. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the REBOOT Recovery Show. Not all of us grew up in Hallmark movie homes, right? We didn't have two parents that greeted us with warm cookies and milk when we came home from school, or maybe we didn't have the white picket fence with the 2.5 children. Instead, we didn't have those parents that necessarily were excited to help us with class projects or who encouraged us to try out for that school sporting team, even though we knew we weren't very good at it. Not all of us had those things. Some of us had much more traumatic, much more difficult upbringings. And these experiences sometimes can crush our self-confidence and leave us almost stunted in our development. And if these issues aren't addressed, we'll end up trying to solve adult-level problems with child-level expertise. Adult-level problems with child-level expertise. It won't work, and then we'll end up overwhelmed, feeling stuck, feeling frustrated, and in most cases, becoming symptomatic. And we're going to get into that today, here in a little bit. But first, as we always do, we'd like to take some questions from our listeners. If you've already submitted a question, I wanted to thank you. We've had so many people submit comments and questions. You all are amazing. You're why we do the show in the first place. And so keep them coming. You can always submit them to us on Twitter or Facebook, or email them to us at show@rebootrecovery.com. As I mentioned, Lori's here in the studio with me, joining me again, and she's reviewed these questions. So what's in the queue today?
Okay, here's a question that was submitted that I think will be good to cover. It says, I grew up in a very abusive home and have struggled in relationships for as long as I can remember. I want to heal, but I am not even sure where to begin. I've been through so much, it feels daunting to start. What advice do you have?
Right, yeah, well, thank you for the question. Starting anywhere is better than not starting. I'm not sure. I mean, the question sounds like it was almost asking, like, where should I start? Where's the right place to start? I'm not sure that there's a right place. I can tell you the wrong place would be not starting. I think about there's really three sort of genres of trauma. You have acute trauma, which is a single incident, a specific moment of trauma. You've got what they call chronic trauma, which is a type of experience over a repeated period of time. So that might be like domestic violence. I was hit, every day of my life for a period of time, or every week of my life for a period of time. That would be chronic. And the third one is what they call complex trauma. And in my experiences, complex traumas are often the most difficult to heal, not because they're actually unable to be healed, but because people are less likely to start healing simply because of the level of complexity. I almost picture, have you ever had like the little necklace chains? Like if you get a kink in it or get them twisted, it can feel like impossible to unkink those necklaces, to untangle those necklaces. And sometimes people just throw them away if they're cheap chains, because it's just, what's the point? I'm not going to get them untangled. And I think a lot of times, in a Christian context at least, we believe in a being called Satan. I believe a lot of times Satan, or our enemy, he actually tries to make us focus in on just how complicated and just how complex the trauma would be in an effort to discourage us from even starting. And maybe we just feel the need to throw away our lives or throw away that segment or that dream that we had instead of actually starting it. Some good advice would be to find a good counselor or join a Reboot Recovery group, get plugged into some place where you can begin a process around other people who are on a similar journey. You mentioned that you've had some trouble with relationships. I think that she said something about, yeah, I would say read every book you can on how to develop healthy relationships, whether that's dating, marriage, family, parenting. I'm not sure what context, but read everything you can get your hands on that's good on that subject. And then I guess also just keep listening to the podcast, keep tuning in, making intentional investments in yourself. And I think you'll start to see that over time, it might be a long journey. Your traumas sound like they didn't happen over a period of a few days, and the healing won't happen over a few days. But over time, if you stay the course, I guarantee you'll start to get that necklace untangled, and you'll get one little spot undone and a knot, and you see a bunch more, but at least that part of the string is starting to straighten out. And that's kind of how it'll work for you as well. Thanks for the question. Good call.
Yep. Here's another one. It says, my son deployed to Iraq several times over the past decade. I can tell he's hurting, but he has completely cut us out of that part of his life. My husband and I are very worried about him, but if we bring anything up, he just shuts us down. Should I keep forcing the issue, or do I just wait?
Yeah, I think being a parent, I'm a parent as well. I think it's really tough to sometimes see our children hurting and feeling helpless. I think that's really challenging. I guess what I would do if it were my son is I would sit down and I would actually speak to him very clearly and plainly. And I would use language to describe how I am concerned and how I feel. I would be very careful to avoid any language that could come across like criticism or judgment. So I would say something like, son, I want you to know that I am very, my dad, your dad and I am very concerned about you. And we know that you don't want our input, and that's totally okay, right? And let him know it's okay that if he doesn't take your advice, because the goal of this conversation is not for you to give them advice or for him to take action. You're not trying to give him boundaries over how he can heal or even advice. What you're trying to do right now is just create a safe space. You're trying to create safety where he knows that whether or not he accepts or refuses your advice, that you're a place he can always return home to, and he can always find somebody who's on his team, on his side, cheering him on, wanting the best for him. And that's really important. So often we mistake, we overlook that stage of safety. And I think establishing that will be important. But I think also the only time I would escalate the issue is if you start noticing like self-harm, self-neglect, suicidality, things like that, in which case I recommend kind of the ACE system, which is ask, and then care, and then escort them in that way. And so I would at that point, if I started noticing specific signs of self-neglect or self-harm, I would probably say bring it up to him, say that you're concerned, go and join him, and then escort him to some place, and don't leave his side until he's in a safe place and he's calmed down and he's sort of worked himself out of that suicidal or that self-harm place. That would be my advice on that. Don't take it personally when he rejects you. It's not personal. He's not rejecting you. He's rejecting dealing with or having to confront his circumstances and his trauma. And your job right now is to love him and to be there when he is ready, because he will be. And if you're just patient and wait, that day will come. So that's a really good question, a moving question. My heart goes out to you, and I do pray that he would accept your love and your kindness, and that he would let you love him well. In that. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for questions right now. We're going to get into this really great topic today. We're going to talk about how to build self-confidence even when that confidence has been crushed by traumatic events of the past. We're going to talk about that when we come back.
This episode of the Reboot Recovery Show is brought to you by our good friends at Marriage Dynamics, offering courses that strengthen marriages and workshops that save marriages. Marriage Dynamics says, we are so thankful for the Reboot Ministry as a resource for so many. Learn more at marriagedynamics.com or savemymarriage.com. Marriage ministries with extraordinary results. Advice from the Reboot Recovery Show is for informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for the specialized training and professional judgment of a healthcare or mental health care professional. Reboot Recovery cannot be held responsible for the use of the information provided. Please always consult a trained mental health professional before making any decision regarding treatment of yourself or others.
Welcome back to the Reboot Recovery Show, where we are overcoming trauma together so we can embrace a brighter future. I'm Evan Owens, your host. I am so excited to have you with us. Without you, there's no point in us doing the podcast. Well, as much as Lori likes listening to me rattle on,
Right.
I don't think she would sign up for this. Earlier I nicknamed her accidentally L'Oreo, like a cookie. So I think maybe we're going to work that into the show somehow
Let's
today.
do it.
I don't know exactly how. But
Can we bring cookies to the show?
That'd be great. Great. Welcome to the Cookie Podcast. Today we're discussing white macadamia. What's your favorite kind of cookie? What is your favorite kind of cookie?
Chocolate chip, warm chocolate chip.
Really? Do you have to have coffee or milk with
Milk.
it? Milk, yeah, ice cold. Yeah,
Ice
I'm
cold
with you on
milk,
that.
yep.
I'm with you on that. So, yeah, I'm good. I'm actually an oatmeal raisin fan or a peanut butter fan. Yep, I'm weird that way. I don't
too
like
bad.
chocolate that much.
Yeah.
So, the thing about it is when every one of us starts off, it's funny we're talking about cookies and milk because that's a little kid's thing, but every one of us starts off as a little person in a great big world. Right? We're this tiny little inferior being surrounded by authority figures that have expertise and answers that we want. They are the de facto guides of our life. They're the de facto experts simply because they've lived longer. They're supposed to show us the ropes, almost how to download to us expertise or skills that's going to help us learn to be an effective, thriving adult member of society. And over time, they do start to share and delegate some of these skills and expertise with us. So, for example, when you're very little, they start teaching you to hold a spoon or a fork and pick up the food and how to put food in your mouth. And over time, that translates from here, I'm going to show you, to now I'm going to put you in this chair, and if you're going to eat, you're going to be feeding yourself, or else, whatever. Me with three boys that are 6 and under, they have to get to that age pretty quick or they starve, right? They starve. And so it begins with that. Then it continues on to, walking. First, they're going to let you take a step or two, and then pretty soon you're going to be off to the races running. And this continues all the way until we reach adolescence, which is when now we shift from sort of wanting to download from authority to actually wanting to rebel against that authority. What we actually want to say is, I feel mentally older than maybe I am, so I'm ready for adult responsibilities even though I'm still a teenager, and I'm going to rebel against, I'm going to push back to see what happens when I don't have to listen to this authority. And finally, we reach adulthood. Well, at least that's the goal, I think. Right. In today's society, I'm not sure everyone's reaching adulthood anymore, but that's the goal. That's where we strive to reach adulthood. And this is where we start to take ownership of our own lives, right? We start to view ourselves as equals to our peers. We make our own choices. We decide what we're going to do with our time and our talents and our energy. And with that, we don't feel the need to submit to someone else telling us what to do with our lives. We get to decide when we're going to wake up and when we're going to sleep and what we're going to eat and not eat and all those sorts of wonderful things that come with us. But you see, some of us, we grew up or grow up underneath authorities that injure how we see ourselves, or what I would call as our expertise, our adult skills. You see, some of these environments that we grew up in actually injured our ability to thrive as an adult. They make us believe things like we don't have any talents, or they lead us to say that they have to think for us. If you need to think, let me do that for you. You've never been too bright in the decision-making department. Let me make your decisions for you. Maybe they're overbearing. Maybe they're abusive. They're the kind of person that says, if I want your opinion, I'll ask for it, or I'll give you your opinion on what you should think, right? AKA, you're not responsible enough to make your own opinion. Let me tell you what your opinion should be. Now, I know none of our listeners have upbringings like that, probably, but
not.
Right, I mean, there are people that do, and these kind of people, a lot of times, they don't feel like they got criticism from their families. They got judgment from their families or from their environment that they grew up in. And if those skills and talents and expertise aren't shared to us, then what begins to happen? What begins to happen when these authority figures don't transfer or don't delegate these skills to us? I see this so often. Someone carries childhood level skills into adult relationships. I see it all the time where they're the age of adult. They look like an adult. They walk, talk, and sound a little bit like one, and they participate in adult activities. But they reason, they cope, they process like a child. Those mechanisms that are existing to help us have thriving relationships are stunted. And so their reactions aren't adult level reactions. They're actually child reactions to adult level problems. And it's almost like they've been thrust into adult level responsibility without adult level capability or capacity. Maya Angelou once said that everyone gets older, but not everybody grows up. I mean, imagine if a baby was suddenly self-aware and put into a situation where suddenly it was thrust with adult responsibilities, it would feel totally overwhelmed, right? There would be anxiety, there'd be fear, there'd be doubt, there'd be worry. The list goes on and on and on. And the same is true for us, right? If we walk around in an adult body with adult responsibilities, but still have kid-like emotional or mental coping skills, emotional intelligence, how overwhelming would that be? We'll likely be plagued by all sorts of a myriad of emotional problems, depression, inferiority complexes, anxiety, right? Every time we do something, like I apply for a better job or go out for the promotion or I get up to give a speech, whatever it is, all those things, I'll be overwhelmed if they offer anything except for full approval. Criticism will be perceived as judgment. I'll have flashbacks to when I was before. Instead of it being feedback, it'll be something that's judging me. And I'll begin seeking that affirmation wherever I can find it. And when I don't find it, my self-esteem, my self-confidence will be even further crushed. And to make matters worse, not only will it be crushed, but there's things that I should attempt, that a healthy, thriving adult attempts, that I may not attempt because the way I see myself is not as a person who attempts those kind of things. After all, I've been told my whole life that I was no good, that somebody else would do the thinking for me. And so therefore, I'm just going to stay here and remain stuck. So the question is, how can I develop self-confidence? And I hate to say it, but in my experience, there's really only one way that self-confidence is developed, and that's that you simply do it. Whatever it is, you start doing it. Because with competence starts to come self-confidence. So an example, if I stand up to walk across the room right now, I don't stand up and go, man, it feels really risky for me to start taking steps again. I'm just not sure I can do it. Right? Because I've spent years walking around that I trust that I have the competence to be able to walk from here to the kitchen, get a drink of water, and come back. I don't have to cognitively process, is this a good choice? Well, the same is true with any type of competence and self-confidence, that once we start doing it, the more we do it, the more competent we become, the more our self-confidence becomes, and we start to feel like we can actually do things because our expertise is developed. And it's interesting that as we put ourselves in these situations, start to realize that we're far more capable than maybe we and others have given ourselves credit for, we start to suddenly view ourselves as equal to other adults. We start to say, you know what? Rather than feeling as an inferior creature, lacking some secret talent or formula that was supposed to exist, you say, I'm an equal. And when we feel this sense of equality, we begin to face our past with a different vantage point, with a different perspective. Because now we can look at that and say, you know what, harm was done by this person. I can call it what it was, that person didn't treat me fairly. This was traumatic. This was wrong. And when we put on our adult perspectives and view them as an equal, suddenly we can see them for who they are, versus before we still let them keep a place of authority, remaining in authority over our situation because we didn't see ourselves as equal to them. And that's a recipe for leaving an open wound unhealed. Because what they say about us or said about us doesn't have to control us anymore, because now we are their equal. And I get to decide how they are going to make me feel now. This is what the Bible talks about. One of the most famous passages, 1 Corinthians 13, slightly out of context, but I think it applies here. It's at the end of the love chapter, and it says, when I was a child, I spoke like a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. You know, this is written in the context of what real love should look like. What real love should look like. Maybe it's not the kind of love you were given. Maybe you need to put that behind you and instead embrace this new, richer, true love, which is what God says about you. It's what He says that you are. He doesn't say that your best days are behind you, or that you're defined by the success of your career, or you're defined by what others think of you anymore. He says something different. He says, you're who I say you are, because you see, I created you. And in Galatians, it talks about this as well, where it talks about now you're an heir, you're a child of God, you're an heir. 1 Peter talks about that you're a royal priesthood. You see all these things start to add up, and you start to realize who you really are. And that crisis of confidence, that crushed self-confidence begins to be rebuilt. And that's how traumas of the past are overcome, by taking what we know to be untrue and challenging it with what we now know to be true. So the answer is, how is it developed? Is that you do it. And you can do it. You can. It may be scary. It's scary when kids start to do adult things for the first time. Those first couple steps are scary, but over time, you're going to gain confidence and expertise. Because when the view of yourself changes, your view of your experiences change, which allows you to change your view of how others impact you. And maybe you'll start to feel like you're moving forward. And moving forward is what this podcast is all about. Remember, we're overcoming trauma so we can embrace a brighter future. And you have a brighter future. So that's it for this episode of the Reboot Recovery Show. Hopefully you found that encouraging and uplifting. Hopefully you'll be able to look back at some of your self-confidence things and you'll be able to start overcoming those just a little bit. And until next time, again, I'm Evan Owens. Let's overcome trauma together.